So before we dive into like the whole Rock of Love, and I want to ask like about the other seasons of Rock of Love and Charm School, and of course I Love Money because we didn't get to see it, and I still want to see it. I do want to ask about Heather, because Heather did start the podcast with you, and you guys kind of were co-hosts in it together. And then there was a bit of a falling out that I did naturally want to ask you about, to see what your response to any of the stuff that she's put out on social media is, and to see kind of where you guys stand and if there's been any mending.
The Heather situation was really, really upsetting, and is still very upsetting. When Heather came back into my life, I was really excited, and I really liked how she and I, our banter back and forth and our rapport with one another, our chemistry. And I think that she is a very good person. Deep down, she's a good girl. She unfortunately has a lot of demons. And, I heard the interview that you did with 12 Pack, which I thought was a great interview. Love 12 Pack. And he really hit the nail on the head with a lot of things that he said about her. He mentioned that she was very obsessive. She is very vindictive. And I'm like, yeah, he totally nailed it. And so what ended up happening pretty much right out the gate, Heather was using the Talk of Love podcast to essentially air her grievances and any of the castmates from the past, or even Bret Michaels himself, that she felt wronged her from her perspective. She was using the podcast to bash them and shame them. And so immediately I was like, girl, no, like this is not what the podcast is for. I mean, first of all, I like all these people that Heather's bashing: Megan, Farrah, Ashley, Brett, all these people, 12 Pack. I like these people, and so I told her, and I was like, and it's such a negative energy, like, let's not use the podcast for this.
Yeah.
And she would just get so angry, and we would fight, and it just got really brutal. She accused me of taking their side over her side. I'm like, there is no side. This is all stuff that happened 12 years ago, So, the thing about Heather that really is a shame and makes it difficult to try to work through things with her, when 12 Pack mentioned the vindictiveness, Heather has a three-pronged approach of dealing with problems. First, she gathers all of the personal information about you, any kind of personal problems or anything in your personal life. She uses that and she weaponizes it. Then if your dirty laundry is not like dirty enough to air, she'll make up just blatant lies about you. She'll just lie about you. And then her third part approach to dealing with it is then she will use all of that to publicly shame you. And it's just such an unhealthy and toxic way to deal with problems. Like, girl, just talk to the person or ignore them. Why does it have to be this like giant public spectacle of shaming? And with the thing with case in point with Megan, the big thing was she was going and saying like, oh, Megan had sex with this person, had sex with that person to get her own show, which totally wasn't true. But there she was, slut shaming, and again, public humiliation. With 12 Pack, she was like, oh, his body isn't really like that. He's an imposter. He throws up his food, blah, blah, blah. So body shaming. And she tried to do that on the podcast too, and I had to stop her. That led to a big fight. And again, not true. With me, she made a bunch of posts online about my husband's dad helping me out with finances. My dog had just had a really major surgery that cost almost $2,000. I didn't have the money. He helped me out with that. She put me on blast for that, dragged my dad's father into it. I'm like, girl, why, if you have a problem with me, why are you publicly airing my finances? Like, really? And so it's really sad. And the problem is also that her other go-to is playing the victim. And it's always everybody else's fault. It's never Heather. But if you think about all the people she's had issues with, Heather hates 12 Pack, Heather hates Megan, Heather hates Brett, Heather hates Lacey. Who is the common denominator in all of this? It's Heather, And so the other thing I've noticed too is a lot of the people she tends to have serious problems with, me, Megan, 12 Pack, Brandy C, we're all married. And personally, no shame on anybody, whether they're married, whether they're divorced, whether they're single. I don't care. It's no one's business. But she doesn't like that. She feels that they have one up on her if they're married, if they're doing well in life. And to be honest, this all really started getting out of control when she, you know, she spent the last few months with me, so I really know her quite well. And she was having like major problems with her real estate career, and she wasn't able to sell houses like she wanted to. And she was really, really stressed. And so when she gets stressed, instead of focusing on that, what she does is she starts obsessing on everybody else. And that's where she puts her stress. She's like, what is Megan doing? I have to expose Megan. What about 12 pack? I got to expose him. What about Lacey? I got to expose her. It's always like exposing is kind of her thing.
Yeah.
But what I think that is that she herself is afraid of being exposed. So she has to put the attention on everybody else so they don't look at her. And the sad part about that is she spends so much of her time and energy trying to make everybody else miserable because she herself is miserable. And it took a lot of time for me to figure all this out. And at the end of the day, it's heartbreaking. It's really sad. I'm sad for Heather. I'm sad she's in this place. You know, she has turned into a hater, and that's not the Heather I know. And anyway, it's really, really, really heartbreaking. I've shed many of tears over the situation. But I also want people to know, who are fans of Rock of Love, when you hear Heather spouting these things about me or about 12 pack or Megan or Brett or whatever, just take it with a grain of salt, because Heather is hurting. Yeah. Heather's in pain. This is her go-to. And we just have to give her as much compassion as we can. That's really the bottom line.
Well, it's like what we were talking about earlier about self-reflection, and like sometimes you need to look inward, and you also have to realize that when you have an issue with other people, sometimes it's because they're the mirror that showing us the parts of us that we don't really want to see. And we've tried to, because Heather has reached out to the show and she was very upset with Dave's interview, and I've talked to Dave since, and you know, I want to thank you and thank Dave for both kind of coming on the show and like indulging us in all this reality TV tea. But also, you know, I don't feel like either of you necessarily wanted to have an issue with her or bashing her in any way. I think there's a lot of love that's going her way. And, you know, I think whatever healing or peace she's seeking for, hopefully she can, you know, find that and, you know, be able to find some happiness within her life. Hopefully she's doing a lot of meditation right now in quarantine.